I knew nothing about community colleges, but I had attended Concord and I had attended Bluefield College, and both of those colleges were really good institutions, no doubt about it. But at that time, I had no interest in becoming a teacher, and I underlined that. Can you believe that? That's what Fred back there, who's a good friend of mine, and Dale, we were talking this morning. He said, "Bill, you didn't like school that way." Well, I didn't want to be a teacher either. Things change. You find things that you really get interested in that you want to do, and that's what I did. But at first, I did not want to be a teacher like my mother, and she was a lifelong teacher and a good teacher. But I always considered myself to be an instructor. I think more than I did a teacher, for whatever that's worth. What I found out on the first day here at Dabney was his faculty and staff were a serious group of people, because I had other colleges that I could compare them to. There wasn't a lot of real play here. I mean, students that I knew were serious about getting an education. And their mission, our faculty was, my mission was to get an education or a skill and to go on to higher education, if that be what I desire to do. And a lot of my students our students over the years have gone on to universities and colleges and become professional foresters in addition to being technicians. And I didn't write this down in my notes, but I used to make the comment, I trained technicians, and that's what I did. We had a lot that went on to four-year schools and got their bachelor's degree, and I've always said, man, what a combination of employee would be a student with technical skills and then a bachelor's degree on top of that. I think I had one time a reputation of just being a technical forestry instructor, but I was glad when our students moved on. I was also glad when they went to work too, and they were successful in their work as two-year graduates. These names have been listed. This man right here, Robert Lockhart, Bob Lockhart, they were well-prepared instructors with educations and a lot of experience in their fields. These guys were good. I'm not going to say they weren't. Mr. Lockhart was hard. Mr. Weaver had field skills and stories that nobody could match. And I appreciated that. And you know what? Boy, that really got me fired up and got me interested in this college right here. And going to college and, for a change, making my mom happy. And making better grades, things like that. So Mr. Lockhart and Mr. Weaver played a great part in my life and my education. And I've always measured the value of my instructors by the success of their graduates. And we had another advantage in our earlier years in forestry at DSLCC, and we had Dr. Backles, who was our president. He was a forester, and that did come in handy, I'll tell you that right now. And he was a trapper. Anybody know what a trapper is? You know where I first met him? He was approachable here on this campus, but I was afraid of him. I probably didn't say too much when I saw him on the sidewalk, but I see him down here in bib overalls or blue jeans with a trap line, and we communicated on that trap line. What we did was, he was just making sure I wouldn't steal any of his fur out of his traps. I'm sure about his traps. But that's where I met him. That was on this Jackson River back here. So when I come back for the interview, it wasn't so intimidating when I came back, for the job here as forestry technician. But I longed for a career in the outdoors, and boy, I had a mission, and that mission I was going to do in spite of myself. In spite of being really young, in spite of having a family, in spite of having to work and go to college at the same time, in spite of focusing on getting an education, in fact, I was full of it. And you know what, about that age, you know what it is. I dealt with 18 and 19-year-olds, and there wasn't one of them wasn't full of it, I guess. And some of them weren't, but a lot of them were. You know what I mean? We're just that way, boys. We're just that way. And I dealt with them for years. successfully, I think, for the most part, and all of us being full of it. I'll take credit for that. My class makeup, I want to say a little bit about that because I'm supposed to kind of go over my history here a little bit. In the early years, back in '71, I had adults. I had high school graduates, like I think Dale Crutchfield was a high school graduate over here, right, Dale? And noble veterans. Noble veterans of the day. We had a good many veterans coming in here straight out of Vietnam. And I was a teacher for a while when those boys were coming back. And I never had a minute's trouble out of any of them. They respected me, and I never had 1 minute's trouble out of them. Now, they were hardy partiers, and I had to keep an eye on that, one eye on that. I think Craig knows what that's all about, because we couldn't say have a good time. We weren't allowed to do that. But by law, we weren't allowed to say. Our lawyers, we had meetings, and lawyers would come in and talk to us and say, never tell your students to go have a good time. So then you're liable for telling them to go have a good time. So we didn't tell them to have a good time. We didn't tell them to have a bad time either. We kept an eye on all of that. And one of my students one time said, you ought to write a book. You ought to write a book about all your exploits at Forestry. And I should have, but I'm too tired and too old. You can't see well. So we had a diverse class when I went through. And there were a lot of those guys right here today. And when I started seeing those guys this morning after 30 or 40 years, I was overcome with emotion. I'm surprised I'm not right now. But because it's so real what I'm doing. But when I started seeing some of these people, I was really overcome. I kind of turned my head so they wouldn't see a big tear roll off my cheek. That's what it meant to me, to be around my students and people that I went to school with. I named a few of them. Like I said, not because they were necessarily special, but just that they meant something to me, I guess. And Dale Crutchfield, Freddie Benetti, Buddy Downey, Mike Perkins. You heard a lot of that booger tonight, hadn't you? Mike Perkins. Boy, I heard a lot about Mike too when I first got there. I'll tell you about that in a minute. John Wright. I was going to say a minute ago, if you want to hear a good story, but we don't have time for good stories tonight, ask John about those boys in Bedford where he grew up wrestling chimpanzees in a carnival. Where's John at? You'll have to tell them about that, John. I laughed at that boy so one time when he told us that, I couldn't believe it. And he can tell a good story about that. Danny Dees, Leonard Laddermill, he's not here, is he? Leonard? I wish he may be deceased, I'm not sure. Al Craft, David Harper, who remembers David? I would love to know where he's at. This guy was sharp. I think he was a veteran too. Well, yeah, they got in a real scrap one night at a picnic we had. About the worst one I've ever seen in my life. It scared me. I don't scare that easy. Two Vietnam veterans, and then the next thing you know, they come out of the woods, sound like two John Deere skidders going down through the woods, fighting. I mean, they weren't loving each other, but when they come out of the woods, they were loving each other. Like I said, I've had some good experiences. Anyway, and I think I mentioned Danny Dees. It wasn't soon after all of this when I got here that we started getting some great ladies in our program too. Sometimes I'd rather work with a lady than I would a guy. The difference between my girls and my guys were, and maybe some of you feel the same way, the difference was in 3 months, a lot of my guys were smarter than me. But the girls, my ladies would listen, and they would learn, and they were really good at finessing things. So, yes, sometimes, 3 months is too long. The curriculum's 2 years. But sometimes they were in 3 months, and they already knew more than I did, but usually they figured out in 6 months that they didn't know quite as much as they thought they did. But it was fun working with people like that. They were smart, young, directed. These people that I dealt with in my class and earlier classes and all through the Dabney experience, they were smart, and many of them were young, directed, mission-oriented. They were very slim and trim, and a lot of times they were really good-looking back then. I would like to mention this also, who I consider to be the founding fathers who laid the foundation of this forestry program were Mr. Lockhart and Mr. Weaver and certainly Dr. Backles. And I don't know whether, I know if you had my earlier classes and maybe not so the last part of my career, I asked my students to read Aldo Leopold. Any of you have to read that book when you were here? That was required reading. Sometimes that book would do to you what it did to me, but boy, I got a lot out of that book. And Gifford Pinchot. And what I'm saying here is, I was seeing what I would consider a Gifford Pinchot quality and standard for this forestry program, and it has continued on for 52 years. If you don't know who Gifford Pinchot was, just Google it, and you'll find out real quick. Him and Teddy Roosevelt, I think, were pretty good buddies. Finally, I worked hard like everyone else did to accomplish my dream and complete the required coursework, again, in spite of myself. And when I graduated from this program, boy, Fred said a while ago, Bill, you didn't like going to school before. I did, but I made myself like it because I was being taught the things that I wanted to be taught here at this college. And that had a lot of bearing on what I taught. And I'll explain that here in just a second. But this was a high-quality thing that we were doing here, and I got a good education here, and I knew that. And when I graduated from Dabney, I had 3 job offers, 3 good. That's back in the day when job offers weren't like they are now. They're great now, but back then, sometimes you might be lucky to get 1 job offer. But I got 3 job offers. The one I took was with the Dixie Veneer, which is that high-end veneer mill in Princeton. And really within a few months of taking that job, I was back in school again. And I really spent, telling somebody today, 3.5 more years training for the position that I took here at Dept. I had an interview here. I'm going to say a little bit about that interview because everybody that interviewed me that day are in this room tonight. I can finally thank Mike Perkins for informing me that this job was going to be open. He came up, he called me and said, we want to tour your veneer mill. And I said, no problem. I went to see my plant manager, and I thought they would do it. And he said, well, Milton, you know this plant as well as we do. You can tour, which I gladly did. I wanted to. But Mike brought, how many students did you bring up, Mike?
I guess a handful.
It was a lot of them, and we were looking forward to them coming up, too, because we didn't get a lot of company up there in that plant. It was a big plant. There was 100 and some people there. We didn't get a lot of company, and having a group of young college people in meant a lot that day. But I toured Mike at the Dean through the veneer plant where they dry, slice, sawmill, where they cut it into flitches and things like that. Mike told me that his job was going to be open, and here was my chance to be a forest tech like I wanted to do. At Dean, I wasn't a forest tech. I would have wound up probably being a foreman or a supervisor in that big mill they had up there. And I think that's what their intentions were. And I enjoyed that. And, somebody thinking that much of it to put that kind of money in. But anyway, here's my chance to be a forest tech. I went home that evening and I asked my young wife, Kay, how she felt about moving again. She said, fine. But my little 92-year-old mom, she wasn't 92 then, she wasn't real happy. I taking a granddaughter, or only granddaughter away and moving away again. So she wasn't quite happy. She ended up, I got to give my mom credit. I did it here a while back. Looked at my mother and told her how thankful I was that she pushed me the way she did. And I was able to do what I did. I was offered the job here at Dabney after I interviewed with the wildlife and forestry faculty. You know, I got to make this, I don't know whether they remember this or not. They didn't matter if they did. But we met probably in Tom's or Jen's office, and they pushed a trash can across the floor and said, "There's your seat." And so I sat on the trash can and did so honorably and happy to be there. And they interviewed me. Apparently they liked me and I liked them. And I was offered the job with a pay cut, and still I thought I had died and gone to heaven because I got that job. And that is the truth. I got this job and I was ready to roll.